Welcome, everyone. We're so excited. We know we have a lot of authors, potential authors out there, and we have got a very exciting interview for you today. We have Bruce Barbour, who he just said he's been in publishing his whole life. We have his wife, Karen Moore, who's published more than 100 books. I can't even comprehend that. But combined together, they have so much experience. So we're going to talk about that today. So welcome, Bruce. Welcome, Karen. Thank you for being here.
Great to be here. Thank you.
And Bruce, you were literally born into the publishing industry. I think, like you said, it's been 45 years, generations. I mean, you have worked with many numerous, very successful, very big publishing houses. But yet you've seen the industry change, completely different from when you started. So what has been the biggest, oh my gosh, change from what you've seen when you started to now?
I've been working full-time in publishing for 48 years. And the family started Christian publishing in 1870.
Wow.
1870. With Fleming Revell and my uncle, a guy named Dwight Luty, who you might have heard of.
Yes.
And in 1870, the way authors did books was they got them printed and then they put them in a cart or a buggy or wagon, and they went from one speaking event to another and sold books out of the back of the horse cart. Later on, authors sold books out of the trunks of their cars. And the same thing that worked in 1870 works in 2023. Nothing has changed in the sense of what people do when they've read a great book. When they've read a great book, they tell somebody. And they tell somebody how it changed their life. And then that person goes and finds that book, wherever they find it, out of the back of the horse cart, out of the back of the car trunk, at their local Christian bookstore, or today, or at their Walden or Dalton or Barnes and Noble, or today on one of the e-tail sites, Amazon being the biggest. So the one thing that hasn't changed in Christian publishing, whether it's Christian or general, is that books sell because they change people's lives. They change the way people think. They change the way people learn about places or events. They change the way they're entertained, the way that fiction does. But the big thing that hasn't changed is an idea is still the nexus of the beginning, the genesis of how a book starts and how well it comes across to the reader, and what they do with it, they talk about it, then that generates interest. So even though a lot of things have changed, the biggest change in my 45 years is that now more than 70% of books are purchased at Amazon. Or if you add noble.com and a few other sites, it's probably closer to 75 to 80%. Retail, which used to drive book sales, more or less doesn't exist. That's a huge change. Less than 20% of the books that are sold through either bookstores or your local grocery store or on a choice book rack in your drugstore, wherever it is. That's the biggest change. And what's also changed is that it means authors, which Karen Ann will share with, and it means publishers have to totally change their marketing strategy. Because when I started, our marketing strategy was advertising, promotion, and publicity, books, book tours, book reviews, book interviews, and book talks on TV and on radio, interviews in magazines, and none of those media exist anymore, to a large degree. So now publishers have digital marketing departments, and their whole thing is, how do we drive people to Amazon? and it's now we have a new with Thread that just came out this week. We have a new chat platform that with Thread and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. Those are the way people learn about everything, news and books. So as a publisher, we have to gear ourselves to drive people to where they buy books knowing that there isn't any browsing going on anymore. So the import of a jacket or back cover copy, which used to be the first thing people see, that's not as important, which makes us all crazy, but that's the way it is. And although Amazon's never out of stock, which is a nice thing, but you know, they have about 3 million titles listed. So
yeah, so many.
Superstore had maybe 100,000.
Yeah.
Now you've got millions, which means that it's really hard to find a new author, learn about a new book idea. It's hard because there's so much noise. So that's the biggest change, is where people buy books and how do publishers promote books through those social media, internet channels. And as an author, it's totally changed also.
Right. And so, Karen, let's talk about that, because you've written over 100 books. You're an award-winning author. So to the authors out there that are trying to compete against those millions of authors on Amazon, what is it that we do to make ourselves different and stand out? Because, you know, it seems like today, because of self-publishing, a lot of people have books. So how do you market yourself in such a way that your book's message reaches a targeted audience?
I think probably the best thing that I do for myself is I write a blog twice a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I try very hard on that blog to either introduce concepts from a book I'm working on or books I've done. I try to keep inviting my audience to join me on my Facebook author page and Goodreads and some of those places. So I think that the best thing we can do is continue to write. You know, if we're really in that business, then writing is what we do all the time, whether we're working on a book or an article or some other way. And so I've tried more of those things in recent years, probably than ever, you know, and doing more podcasting and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good, because like Bruce said, the Facebook, the Instagram, that's where you catch them and you get that interest started. And then that prompts them to want to read the rest of the book. So Bruce, as a coach and as an agent, you work with people on helping progress those ideas forward. What are you looking for? And what is the criteria to say that book I want to work with, and that author and that message I want to see in print?
Passion. If however the communication comes to me, whether it's through a Zoom or email or rarely now a phone, but however it comes to me, sometimes a text, I need to hear that this author can't go to sleep at night without thinking about their book, can't wake up in the morning for 5 minutes where they haven't thought about their book, their idea. And so that's number one. If they're not excited, then we got a real problem. And they got to excite me, because if I'm not excited, then I'm not going to do a good job pitching the publisher. So passion's number one. Number two, they have to know their content. If I ask them, why did you write the book? And they have to think, then I know I got a problem. If I ask, who is your reader? Who are you sitting across the table from? I have a talk that I do at conferences called Two Eyes and One Heart. That's who you're writing to. You're writing to one set of eyes and one heart. And if you don't know what is making that person tick, if you don't know what is it that's making them nuts and they can't stop worrying or thinking or being excited about whatever it is, if you don't have that immediately in front of you, then we got a problem. Another thing I look for is, have they done their homework? You know, I get a lot of pitches and they say, I've looked at your website and I just know you're the guy, you're the agent for me. for my children's book. Well, on my website, it's very clear that I don't do children. If they had spent 2 minutes reading my website, they would know I don't do children. I don't do fiction. I don't do poetry or gift. I have my little niche and I stay there. And so if they've done their homework and they know authors I've worked with, which you can find on my website, and they know categories that I excel with, which you can find on my website, then they've done their homework. Next question. What are a few books that are bestsellers that are similar to the audience that you're writing to? Can you give me a few titles? You'd be surprised how many authors don't read. They don't read other books. They don't know where they fit in.
Mhm.
And that's a problem because, you know, the worst thing you can say to a bookseller is there's never been a book like this. Because the bookseller is going to look back at you and say, oh, well, where should I put it in the store then? If it's a retail environment. And if it's never been a book like this, what category is it going to be listed at Amazon? So if they don't know these rudimentary 101 things in our early conversations, I point them back to my website if they haven't looked at it. And it's all there, what you need to do, what you need to do to prepare a proposal, what you need to do in terms of presenting your idea to me or any other agent. And then we go from there. So the biggest thing is passion. It has to be a big idea, can't be written for a smaller audience. And they have to be prepared to do the work. And the thing that I encourage them to do, whether I'm doing a writer's conference or video or a one-on-one conversation, is I say, here's what I want you to do. Stop writing. Stop writing. Because I want to know what your premise is. I want to know what your organizational structure is. And if you don't know those basic things, it's kind of like a builder building a 3-story building. If they don't do the homework and make sure they got a good foundation, by the time they get to that second floor, it's going to get a little floppy.
Yeah.
And so those are just kind of in a nutshell what I and every other agent is looking for, because if we don't have those things, when we get to the publisher and they start asking us questions, we're toast.
Yeah. Great thoughts there, because it's not just about God called me to write a book. It's also knowing the business behind the book. And Karen, you've written 100 of them. You've got best-selling books. You have demonstrated what it means to do the work. You must have started writing and never quit since you were born, because you have 100 books. But what's it take to then, okay, God gave me an idea. I'm so excited about it. Then what? So as an author, what were the next steps you did to get from idea to published and the box in the mail with your first stack of books?
You know, I think one of the best things that's helped me in the process of my own learning how to do books and how to really stay in there with them is that I do, as Bruce just said, I do the same thing. I say to myself, don't write. It's not time to write. Just because I have an idea, my first step is to really play with that idea. I'm a brainstormer by nature, I guess. And so I do a lot of research. I look around and I say, what's out there that's like this? What isn't out there that people need? I try to think about felt needs and real needs of people. And I pay attention to that as much as I can. And then before I even begin a book, and as you know, I do daily devotions a lot of times, which is, a lot of words. That's 100,000 words by the time I'm done with a 366 kind of daily. So the way I help myself is I plan and organize. And before I even begin the writing, I have 366 ideas, topics, things that I'm going to address as I go through the book. And I have scriptures that I've associated or decided I'd like to use somewhere. I have those lists, because when you get to about 180, you feel like, wow, what can I say that I haven't already addressed? And those lists are what keeps me back, those in prayer, where I just continue to ask God, what else am I missing? Holy Spirit, help me understand what I'm missing. Those kinds of things also play into it, of course, but I really try to stay organized and pay attention to what I think I've missed, that somebody needs this perspective. My whole hope in writing is to give people just one more little way to view something, another opportunity to seek out the work. And if I can find one little nugget that will help them do that, that's what I try to do.
Good, very good. It's great to have a process because you have to have a plan to tackle, the book. I'm an author and I've only done one. I'm working on a second one, but I did a much better time. I'm doing a much better time the second go round than I did the first time with a plan. So I think that's a great point. Let's talk about self-publishing. So that's the big thing now. People bypass what I think is the necessary process of working with someone who can help them really nail down that process and that idea. But a lot of people are going self-publishing. So Bruce, what do you have to say about that? Is that sometimes a good route, or is it better to try to just take a little minute and find someone like you, an agent you could work with?
Generally speaking, I'm big on self-publishing if it's done correctly.
Okay.
There are lots of good reasons to self-publish a book. In one of the challenges that authors have, and Karen Ann is one, is that having done 100 or 125 books, she's fairly well known in bookstores. But that doesn't matter anymore. Because how many copies of books sold in bookstores has no relationship to how many copies it might sell on Amazon. It's apples and oranges. So a lot of authors who used to have regular relationships with both agents and traditional publishers, traditional publisher being like a Tyndale or a Zondervan or a Thomas Nelson, these authors are not getting contracts anymore. Because the one thing that publishers need from an author is a fairly strong connection to their intended audience. That connection we call platform. And that platform can be something related to a social media platform, which means how many followers they have, how many times do those people share thoughts that the author has posted, and the publisher measures, because those metrics are available to every author. Those publishers want to know how many followers do you have on Facebook. They want to know, but more importantly, they want to know what percent of those followers who get your blog or get your newsletter, how many of those followers think enough about your content, do they share it with their people? And if they have lots of followers, but they only have a 10% share, that means that the majority of their followers don't really care enough about what's being said to share it with their own friends. That to a publisher says, this isn't going to work. If they can't even get their own friends to, to share the book, how am I going to sell copies? So if an author starts today, whether they're doing traditional or self-publishing, they're the ones who are going to initiate the momentum that's going to translate into word of mouth, which is going to translate into book sales, whether it's self-published or traditionally published. So that's so the first thing an author has to have today to get the attention of an agent or the attention of a publisher is a fairly robust social media. They have to be active, as Karen is, they're doing 2 blogs a week. They have to be growing their subscribers to those blogs. They have to be active in their websites, in their Facebook pages. And if they are a speaker, get out there and speak, do interviews like this. These are all things that contribute to an author building their brand, building their platform. There's a great book, which I highly recommend, called Platform by Michael Hyatt. And he's a publishing friend, been around for a long time, and he teaches people how to build their platform. And it's not a costly thing, but it is a timely thing. And it's something you can never get enough of. It isn't something you can do for 2 weeks and then stop. Publishers and agents don't want to hear what you're going to do when the book is published, because that's about a year late. If you're talking about starting a website that's going to support your platform, and you're going to do that when the book is published, then that means you haven't done any work to get people ready for your book. And when it gets announced, no one's going to know about it, and it won't sell. So self-publishing has to deal with those same issues of getting the word out. How do you bring attention to yourself? And they also, when I say do it right, they have to be willing to get an editor, a professional book editor, not Aunt Mary, who's an English teacher in 3rd grade, not their brother, who's an English professor in college, and they have to get a good cover designer so that it doesn't look like they did it themselves. And you can tell, you as a consumer, you can tell what's a self-published book and what's a professionally published book.
You sure can.
And
that's so true.
It's not edited well. It doesn't read well. If it's not designed well, a book designer, not a graphic arts designer, which is the cousin who's a friend of your cousin's cousin, and they and whatever. You want to get a book designer, you want to get a book editor, and you want to get a professional book designer to do the cover. That's the right way to do self-publishing. And the other thing is, you got to have that platform. The word self-publisher, everybody thinks about being published, but the key word is self. You are now in charge of sales. What do you know about sales? You are now in charge of marketing. What do you know about marketing? If you don't know anything about sales, you don't know anything about marketing, then the thing to do is to self-publish and give it to your friends and family. And a lot of people want to do that. It's great, it's cathartic. They want to have something for their grandkids or their kids, and that's fine. But if you want to have an impact on a general audience, you got to follow the same basic rules that authors working with Thomas Nelson have to, which is listen to your editor, get a great designer, get a good cover, do your homework on your audience, and then if you do that, a self-publishing is a great model. But if you've never sold anything, and you don't have a business or a ministry that's getting in front of people, communicating ideas, and you don't have a sense of how do you get people to make a commitment, whether it's a donation or a purchase, you're going to have a hard time self-publishing, because who's going to sell and market the book if you don't?
Well, and so Karen, let's go back to you, because you're the author with the 100+ books with the bestsellers. And so a lot of people think they're going to come out with a book. I thought this when my book came out, I was going to be a bestseller within 2 weeks, and I was going to tour the country, and I was going to be at all the book signings and all the things. So then COVID came. And so anyway, what's it really like to be an author? And because, see, you've demonstrated consistency and commitment over time. And I think that is a very big part of it, because it's not for the faint of heart. So Karen, will you address what it takes to really be an author in today's competitive environment?
Okay, well, you are absolutely right. It is kind of like love. If you're not really, really into it, don't go there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that make it a disappointing kind of adventure, because I can't tell you how many times I've gone in bookstores, even when bookstores were more prominent, and I'd say, wow, I only see 3 or 4 of my books in there, or gee, they only have like 2, they don't have my latest one. So I would walk out feeling somewhat disappointed that it hadn't been placed. Of course, now it's even less than that, because there are just not that many carriers in the brick and mortar world. So what keeps you going? What keeps you really doing the work? Well, in my case, it's my readers, honestly, because I have often said, gosh, I guess I'm never going to have a a Jesus calling kind of devotional is just going to be phenomenal out there. But I do feel that I have worthy kinds of books that have come out, many that I've gotten lots of wonderful, wonderful feedback. And I think that that message back to me from readers has helped me continue on this process and believe that, you know, I may not be doing the book that 5 million people are going to read, but if the 50,000 people that read it needed that, or 5 people need it, to be honest, I want to still be there for them. So I think it's in my heart a calling, and it is what I believe that I'm intended to do, and I will do it as long as, you know, my synapses will fire.
I think managing expectations is really important, Beth. And you know, metrics are important to know. The average self-published book in its lifetime is selling about 200 copies. 200 copies.
Yeah.
And many
Yeah.
don't sell that many. That's average.
Right.
The average traditionally published book, sells about 2,000 copies. 2,000.
Wow.
So if you're in it because you want to be a Jesus calling, you know, it's like saying, I want to write a book on purpose. You spend a lot of time on purpose. And so my goal is to do a book like Purpose Driven Life, which sold 40 million copies. You know, there's a handful of books in 50 years that sells more than 10,000 copies. It doesn't, rather 1 million copies. It doesn't, you know, doesn't mean that these books that Karen Ann has in front of her aren't changing lives. It doesn't mean that she wants to dream bigger. I've worked with authors. I won't give you names, but people that I've worked with, you know their names. I sold a book one time from a hardcover to a paperback book, and publishers would buy paperback, you know, rights. And I sold one title for $2 million. And the author's share was $1 million. We get, the publisher gets half and the publisher. So I called him. I said, hey, his name was Bob. I said, Bob, can I talk to, well, actually his wife answered. She said, no, he's not here. He'll call you back. Great, call me back. I said, Bob, I just sold the book for a couple $1 million. So your share's $1 million. Now, most people would be pretty excited about that. And this was not a wealthy person. And he said, well, why didn't you get 4 million? And he was saying that not because he was a greedy son of a gun. He was saying it because he writes books to change lives. And if he could write a book that changed 2 million lives, then how come we can't get 4 million lives? That's the passion we're talking about. Yeah. So what did you say? You got some tear-jerking stories here about people who have sent you notes that affirmed exactly what we're talking about. It won't take just but a minute if we have it, Beth, but I think this will help writers with perspective and context with what they're about in this world of writing.
I'll share 2 stories. One, I did a book a number of years ago for teen girls, and it was intended to it was called True Images for Teen Girls. And, you know, it was one of those things, it was 90 devotions. It had a very narrow market, I understood that. But it took a lot of work to do. I was not quite a teen when I was writing it. So I had to do a lot of research and really try to figure out what did I think would relate to girls at that point and what were the issues and the problems. Anyway, so I did the book. It came out. It seemed like it did fairly. It was doing okay, but it wasn't going to, you know, rock the world. And at one point when I was feeling kind of like we were just talking about, I was feeling like, well, I wonder if I've done all I should. I wonder if it's time to hang up my furs or whatever. I'm hanging up. And didn't that same day I get an email from this young girl, 16 years old, and she...
Several years later.
Yeah, this is several years after the book came out.
Wow.
Okay, so it wasn't right away. It was several years later. And she's thanking me for writing that book. She had just gotten it more recently.
Wow.
And she had 35 girls in her youth group. And she
Aw.
wanted to know how to get more copies of the book because she wanted every girl to read this book. And
Mm.
here's why. She told me that from the time she was 13, she'd been anorexic. She had not felt, didn't believe she was going to be healed from it. And she said that she read my book, and though there were two sections that just hit her, that made a difference in her life, and she was now healed at 16 of them.
Instead of
Wow.
6.
And she told me it saved her life. That day I sat down and wept.
I bet.
I said, God, if this one girl needed that book, I am grateful beyond measure that I wrote it.
Amen.
So that was one. I did a book more recently. It's called It's Still Possible, shameless plug. It's Still Possible that I love this book because the intent of it was, we've gone through COVID, we've gone through lots of things, a lot of change, but what do we need? We need to remember that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. We need to
Yes.
keep reminding ourselves that it's not over just because the world is confusing and that there's a lot of noise. So anyway, I wrote this book, and one of the first reviews that I got, and any review you see of mine on Amazon is one that somebody actually reviewed. I don't never paid anybody for a review. So a guy that was in his mid-50s sent me an amazing review about this book. He said, I started to read it because the publisher gave me like 20 of them free when, if I read 20, they would to get them, which is a great way to market your book. But he said, then I had to have the book, and I bought it. And he said, I just want you to know that I had lost hope. I had thought that there was just nothing left for me to do. And I was really in a place where I didn't think anything was going to work. But he said, now, for the first time in a long time, I believe things are possible. Well, it was perfect. It was just what I hoped for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And
really good.
That review you can read that review on the book, It's Still Possible, on Amazon. And the thing that now there are 50 reviews. And that's the beginning of word of mouth. Now, 80% of the people who buy Christian books are women between the age of about 25 and about 55. Men don't buy Christian books. They read them because their darlings bought them and said, here, you need to read this book, but they don't buy them themselves. And the first review for that book was a mid-50-year-old guy who had given up on hope. So you never know what the Holy Spirit is going to do.
Right.
You never know. But if you don't write it as an author, you won't know.
And I always believe that any of us as writers, even if the topics are similar, we have a different voice. We have a different reason for writing. We have a different viewpoint. And that's what people need, because we all learn differently, we perceive differently, we take in information, and we have to process it differently. So we need the voices of each person who's willing to step out and take a chance on themselves in the writing.
Yeah, it's easy to look at Jesus Calling, selling gazillions of copies, and say it was brilliant. But before that book was published, there was another book called God Calling that had been around for 20 years, was a classic, was selling hundreds of thousands of copies every year. And that author wasn't set aside in her own spirit just because there had been a book called God Calling, which was similar in nature. She still felt that passion. She still felt that nudge. And the publisher caught the vision. And I think the Holy Spirit breathes on certain books. And you can't explain how a book like that, whether it's Warren or any of these others that sell millions of copies, that just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
That just doesn't. But it
So-
all starts with the author's heart being in the right place.
Right. So let's end on this final. Bruce, I want you to be the coach, to be the agent, to be the all those years of experience. I want you, because see, this affects people's faith when they think God calls them to write a book. And then it's because, I mean, I know this, I hit brick wall after brick wall. I mean, I stumbled over brick walls, but I did keep going. But what do you say to that person that feels God has breathed upon them a message and experience and there's a book in them, but yet they're discouraged and they don't know what to do next? Because this is so important that we don't let our faith become diminished because of the hard road that it does require.
Correct. And I think, again, getting back to that passion, if God gave you an idea, I believe that God gave you a passion to take that idea, use the gifts that he's blessed you with, prayerfully studying the word, listening to your wise counselors, and then doing the work. And so if you give up along the way, and we just did a conference a couple weeks ago over in Birmingham. This was one of the talks that both Karen and I did, is you've got to stay the course. It's just like the Christian life. You know, we're sanctified until we're purified, and that would be the last day we're on this earth. So not giving up, not listening to that voice that says, you know, you're not good at this. You got better things to do. That's the devil. I sincerely believe, without looking under every rock for a devil, but the devil has all they have to do. All he has to do is get you off focus by 1 degree.
Yep.
Kind of like losing
So true.
Where you're driving in Philadelphia. If you miss it by a street, you're going to be really lost, but you won't know it until you're really lost. So I would encourage authors to be very prayerful, to realize that they're doing this as unto the Lord. Are you going to tell God, who's given you this gift of writing, who's given you this idea, you really believe he's given, are you going to turn around and say you just can't take it, you can't do it anymore? Whose strength are you depending? So that would be my encouragement and my caution to authors who believe that God's giving them an idea, giving them a gift to write, but he isn't going to write it for them.
Right.
Giving you the
That's
help,
right.
the power, the insight, the wisdom of the Holy Spirit, but you got to write it. You got to.
That's right.
You got to write.
You got to do the work. I mean, that's what I say all the time. I mean, you got to do the work. You got to sit down and you got to do the work. And so that is
my encouraging word. That if you're not getting setbacks, you're probably not working hard enough.
yeah, very well said. Very good. So that's a lot of great information for authors. And you guys are available through Literary Management Group. You do conferences. You are a coach. You are there to help people. If someone wants to take something to the next level, you're available to be that person. Obviously, it's your business. You're there to be hired, but sometimes that's the great next best step, is to bring in someone that's a 4th generation publisher and have all the years of experience and the knowledge and the connections. And I think that's a very important thing. So
Karen Ann and I, in addition to doing a lot of work over these years, we know a lot of people.
Exactly.
And so when someone comes that has a question, I can give an answer, but I may not be the right agent because I don't do that particular category. But I know agents who do. If they're looking for someone to help design a book, I'm not a book designer, but I got a lot of book designers I work with. So the biggest thing that we also tell people at writers' conferences is what Jesus told the disciples: you got to ask, you got to knock. If you do those 2 things, you're going to find something. So
that's right.
Asking for help, whether you're going to a writers' conference or you're talking to us on text or talking to us on the phone, ask the question. Don't be afraid to ask the question.
And I would just add that it's important not to set your own limits. You know, we don't always know what God has in mind for any of the work we do. But, you know, when I do something and I find out later that a book has been translated into Arabic or Japanese,
Yeah.
my bailiwick when I started, no. Did I even imagine it? No, but then it happens because God has bigger plans. He is not limited by my lack of being able to see what he could do.
Mhm.
So I would encourage all of us as writers to remember that there's a seed been planted, there's a calling, there's a hope, and God will work with it if we just give him, you know, we give him we're faithful to that call, and then he's faithful to help us.
Amen. And I would add to that, you mentioned writers' conferences. That's an excellent join the groups, the conferences, the writers, the groups that work together, because that's where you meet the people who are that team of people that come alongside you. I mean, y'all are going to be speaking in my state soon. I'm coming to sit and talk to you. So it's a very important tool that people don't know about. Google writers conferences, Christian writers conferences. And before you go investing in a lot of other things, invest in that, because there is a 3 days worth of tools and peoples and connections. And those are critical. I mean, I did a lot of those, and I cannot be thankful enough for some of the conferences that I went to. And so hats off for that, because you guys do the conferences, you're there for people. That's very important. I mean, you make yourselves available, and you've got the amount of experience that people can come and ask you questions is just priceless.
We just did one in Birmingham, and one of the fun things was one of the authors, or one of the women, came up and she said, she was just glowing. You could just tell something's up. And she said, I sat with you a year ago and I pitched you my idea. And the last thing you said was, you come back next year, I want to see this book.
Wow.
And she had the book and put it down in front of me. She autographed it for me. She put it down in front of me and she said, God is changing lives with me. Well,
that's amazing.
That is amazing. That is amazing.
That's amazing.
You
That
know,
is. And that's the testimony part is just incredible. What God does.
What another thing that Karen's talked about is don't zero in on something that you're sure is the way it's going to happen. This book was presented to the publisher as a daily devotional, 366 daily devotion. They came back with a different title. They came back and said, you know, we're having a hard time selling daily devotional in the last couple of years. But this is such a great idea, your content. We'd like to do is it 90 or 100? We'd like to do 100. Could we do 100? And they could be a little longer, because, you know, if you got 366, you've only got 250 or so words per page. But if you did 100, you could develop these thoughts even better. And we think the title should be It's Still Awesome. And it was so much better title than we had talked about. And so that's another thing. Your work is wet cement. When you're working with it, don't get so convinced that you've got the right title, that you've got the right 366 versus 100. You know, that's where you're going to get ideas from these writers' conferences. You're going to meet publishers, you're going to meet agents, meet other people who are writing, and you're going to get some more good. So keep listening to not only the spirit, but to not just mom who will like everything you're writing, but our friends who are
Mom who will be the first one to buy your book.
here.
That's right.
You know what? You're going to give it to her. She ain't going to buy it. So
That's right. That's exactly right. Oh, goodness. Well, this has been such a great topic about authors and publishers and the changing world of books. And I love ending on it is possible, because it is possible. And we have to put our faith in action and write the book and let God do the work in us as he's doing that. Because, you know, God's working on you as you're with every word. And so that's the process of writing that's so miraculous, is God is at work in us, and that book becomes what it should become, because we're being molded and we're being shaped by him, who is the one that needs to do this. So that's awesome.
I can tell you that one of my greatest joys is to read a book I did several years ago as my morning devotional time and go, wow, I don't know how that thought happened, but isn't that amazing? Thank you, God, for that thought, because it just is beyond me. I'm just a keyboard. I just try to write it out.
Yeah.
Well, you have a great saying. You write what you want to read, what you need to read.
I write what
Right.
I hear. I write
Yeah.
what I hear. I know that so often I think if I need this, hopefully I just feel sure there are other people who have this same thing to do.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. That's so true.